January 16th, 1945. Adolf Hitler walks down a red-carpeted corridor in Berlin, passes through a steel blast door, and descends into the ground. He goes down 8.5 meters below the garden of the Reich Chancellery, into a damp, concrete box pumped dry by machines running 24 hours a day. He will not come back up alive. He will spend the last 105 days of his life in that hole, giving orders to armies that no longer existed, moving divisions on maps that did not match reality, and commanding the most powerful military machine in European history without ever standing near it. This is the story of why Hitler chose the bunker over the battlefield, and why that choice, made long before the final days, helped destroy everything he built. Let us start with what most people get wrong. The bunker is not where the story begins. The story begins in the woods of East Prussia on June 24, 1941, 2 days after Operation Barbarossa launched. Hitler arrives at a place called the Wolfschanze, the Wolf's Lair. It sits in the Masurian forest about 8 kilometers east of the town of Rastenburg, now the Polish city of Ketterzin. Organization Todt built the entire complex in secret. Workers were told they were building a cement factory. Thousands of prisoners of war from Poland, Norway, France, and Russia did the labor. None of them stayed longer than 6 months. After 6 months, for security reasons, they were sent mostly to death camps. That is what it cost to give Hitler a place to hide. The complex covered 6.5 square kilometers. 3 concentric security zones, landmines, barbed wire, watchtowers. The innermost zone held the Führer bunker itself and 10 other camouflage shelters with walls 2 meters thick of reinforced concrete. At its peak, over 2,000 people lived and worked there. Hitler's personal routine at the Wolf's Lair tells you everything about how far removed he was from the war. He would wake up around 9 or 10 in the morning, walk his dog, then look at the mail. There was a noon briefing, usually in General Wilhelm Keitel's bunker, that ran 2 hours. Lunch at 2 in the afternoon, a second military briefing at 6 in the evening, dinner at 7:30, then films in the cinema. Then Hitler would give monologues to his secretaries deep into the night, while German soldiers froze to death in the Russian winter. He spent 800 days in that forest compound, more than anywhere else during the war, more than in Berlin, more than at his mountain retreat at the Berghof. 800 days giving orders from inside a bunker. The generals on the front lines got reports every 12 hours. Hitler got briefings twice a day in a well-lit room with Persian carpets and oak-paneled walls. Albert Speer, his own armaments minister, noted that 36 million marks were spent building fortifications just at Rastenburg. Hitler's own bunker had grown into what Speer called a positive fortress, a maze of passages and halls. The physical comfort of command was everything. The discomfort of the field was avoided completely. And now this is where it gets important, because Hitler did not always run from the fight. In the early years, he commanded differently. Before there was a Wolf's Lair, there was a special train called Führer Sonderzug Amerika, later renamed Brandenburg. He used it as a rolling headquarters, moving through occupied territory during the Balkans campaign. During the Battle of France in May 1940, he set up at a forward command post called Felsenest, the Rock Nest, close enough to hear the guns. In those early victories, proximity to the action mattered. The speed of German decision-making in 1940 was genuinely shocking to the Allies. 59 days to conquer France. In contrast, 4 years later, Germany would be the one being conquered. But here's the thing. The generals who served Hitler in the early victories were not fools. Erich von Manstein was one of the sharpest operational minds in the history of European warfare. Guderian had invented mobile armored warfare practically from scratch. Gerd von Rundstedt had over 4 decades of professional military experience. These were not men who needed to be told how to read a map. And yet, when they had early success, Hitler interpreted it as proof that his instincts were superior. When France fell in 59 days, something shifted in Hitler's self-understanding. He began to believe that military professionals were timid, and that his own willpower was what had made the victories possible. That belief would calcify inside the concrete walls of the Wolf's Lair. The pivot happens in December 1941. Operation Barbarossa had launched with the assumption that the Soviet Union would collapse in 3 to 4 months. It did not. Temperatures near Moscow dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Over 100,000 German soldiers suffered frostbite. Heinz Guderian, the general who had made Blitzkrieg famous, watched his men freeze without winter equipment. He recorded a temperature of minus 36 degrees at his position. He made a limited tactical withdrawal to better defensive ground. That withdrawal infuriated Hitler. On December 19, 1941, Field Marshal Walter von Brauchitsch was forced to resign. Hitler fired him and then announced something that made every senior officer's blood run cold. He said he would take personal command of the German army himself. He told his generals that running the army was just a, quote, little matter of operational command that anyone can do. He believed that. He was wrong in a way that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Guderian was fired on Christmas Day, December 25, 1941, for pulling back troops without permission. He had been one of the architects of the tank warfare that had made Germany terrifying. Gone. Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, commander of Army Group Center that had come within 220 miles of Moscow, gone. General Franz Halder, the chief of the German Army General Staff, would last a little longer. He urged Hitler repeatedly to let professional soldiers control operational decisions. Hitler did not want professional soldiers. He wanted obedience. In his December 20th, 1941 meeting with Halder, Hitler stated there would be no retreating from the Russian front near Moscow. His exact instruction: the will to hold out must be brought home to every unit. Halder could stay on as chief of staff, but only if he accepted that Hitler alone controlled strategy. Halder accepted. He had no real choice. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also tell us in the comments what city you're hearing this from. And just so you know, the script is researched using primary documentation. One key source is the stenographic record published as Hitler and His Generals, edited by Helmut Heiber and David Glantz, published by Enigma Books in 2003, which contains the verbatim transcripts of Hitler's actual military conferences from the Battle of Stalingrad onward. These are not summaries. These are the real words. Another source is the peer-reviewed study by Dietrich Dorner and C. Dominic Guss, published in the Review of General Psychology in 2011, titled A Psychological Analysis of Adolf Hitler's Decision-Making as Commander-in-Chief, which analyzed his cognitive patterns through wartime records. Now back to 1942. By the time Germany launched its summer offensive of 1942, Case Blue, Hitler was making decisions from his forest bunker that directly contradicted his generals on the ground. The plan was to drive south, capture the Caucasus oil fields, and simultaneously strike Stalingrad to cut the Volga supply line. General Friedrich Paulus commanded the German Sixth Army, pushing toward the city on the Volga. By September of that year, his chief of staff noted the gradual exhaustion of the troops. Companies that should have held 200 men were down to 60. Halder urged a withdrawal. Hitler fired him. Halder was replaced. The Sixth Army pressed deeper into the city, and on November 19th, 1942, 1 million Soviet troops launched Operation Uranus. 2 Red Army pincers drove around both flanks of the German position. On November 23rd, they met at Kalach, west of Stalingrad. 300,000 German soldiers were encircled. Hitler's generals begged him to allow a breakout westward. He refused. Hermann Göring promised to supply the trapped army by air, despite his own transport commander Wolfram von Richthofen calculating that the Luftwaffe could deliver at most 105 tons of supplies per day. The trapped Sixth Army needed a minimum of 750 tons. On the most successful single day of the airlift, December 19th, the Luftwaffe managed 262 tons in 154 flights. The numbers were never close. Soldiers ate their horses. They boiled leather. They burned furniture to survive temperatures that dropped below minus 30 degrees on the Volga steppe. And Hitler, from his bunker in the forest, kept ordering the Sixth Army to hold. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein attempted a relief operation, Operation Winter Storm, in December 1942. His spearhead got within 48 kilometers of the encircled pocket before being halted. Hitler refused to authorize a simultaneous breakout by Paulus that might have saved a portion of the Sixth Army. The distance was 48 kilometers. The order never came. Paulus and his men held. On February 2nd, 1943, the last German survivors surrendered at Stalingrad. 90,000 prisoners were taken. Most of them died in Soviet captivity from cold, disease, and starvation. Of the 90,000 who walked into Soviet captivity that February, fewer than 6,000 ever returned to Germany. The rest died in camps, many of them before the end of that same year. Germany never recovered strategically. The Wolf's Lair had become something worse than a command post. It had become a reality bubble. The historian Jacob Bohr, writing in Der Spiegel, described how Hitler used the close quarters of the Wolf's Lair to control his generals physically and psychologically. Proximity to Hitler in those damp corridors created a kind of group pressure. Generals who disagreed were not just contradicted, they were humiliated, fired, or threatened. The atmosphere Bohr described was one in which Hitler actively barricaded himself against the outside world, insulating himself from acknowledging, let alone accepting responsibility for, the military disasters accumulating from 1942 onward. General Alfred Jodl, one of Hitler's most loyal military advisors at the Wolf's Lair, privately called the place a cross between a monastery and a concentration camp. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels, himself a frequent visitor to the compound, complained in his diary that Germany did not have a leadership crisis, but what was in reality a leader crisis. The isolation had worked exactly as authoritarian isolation always does. It cut Hitler off from contradiction, from ground truth, from the kind of feedback that competent command requires. Cold, wood, dark. That was the Wolf's Lair in winter. 36 million marks of concrete and camouflage netting, and the man inside it could not read a battlefield. Then came July 20th, 1944. Colonel Klaus Schenk von Stauffenberg flew from Rangsdorf Airfield outside Berlin to Rastenburg. He arrived at the Wolf's Lair with a briefcase. Inside the briefcase was a bomb. The daily briefing was normally held in a reinforced concrete bunker, and Stauffenberg had chosen that location deliberately. The heavy concrete walls would have focused the blast inward and almost certainly killed everyone in the room, including Hitler. But that day, Hitler complained about the heat inside the bunker. The meeting was moved to a wooden hut with thin walls and open windows. Stauffenberg placed his briefcase beneath a heavy oak table, claimed he needed to make a phone call, and left. The bomb detonated at 12:42 in the afternoon. Colonel Heinz Brandt was killed instantly. General Rudolf Schmundt was killed instantly. Secretary Heinrich Berger was killed instantly. General Gunther Korten was severely wounded and died the next day. Adolf Hitler walked out with minor injuries. The wooden walls had vented the blast. The hut had saved him. What came next was a wave of terror unlike anything inside the Wehrmacht before. Guderian, recalled from disgrace in March 1943 after the disasters made experienced commanders suddenly valuable again, now sat on the Army Court of Honor after the July plot, expelling hundreds of officers suspected of disloyalty. The professional core of the German military, already purged of its most independent voices since December 1941, was now gutted further. The men who remained were those willing to agree with the commander, who would not leave his concrete room. On November 20th, 1944, Hitler left the Wolf's Lair forever. He never came back. Soviet troops entered the abandoned complex on January 27, 1945, without firing a single shot. The compound that 36 million marks and thousands of forced laborers had built was empty. 2 days before, on the night of January 24th to 25th, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel had ordered the Wolf's Lair destroyed, under the code name Blowing Up the Island. The Germans blew up their own bunker to deny it to the Soviets. Then came January 16th, 1945. Berlin, the Führer bunker, 8.5 meters down, 30 rooms, a concrete roof 3 meters thick, built by the Hochtief Construction Company, connected to the upper bunker, the Vorbunker, by a stairway set at right angles and sealed by a steel blast door. The complex was located below the water table, so pumps ran continuously to remove groundwater seeping through the foundation. A diesel generator provided electricity. While water was pumped in as the water supply, it was damp and dim. Fine furniture and framed oil paintings had been brought down from the chancellery above by February 1945 to make it feel like something other than what it was, a tomb in progress. Hitler spent his last 105 days here. He left only once, briefly, to decorate a unit of Hitler Youth Boys. He held his war conferences. He moved divisions that were ghosts. He summoned Field Marshal Robert Ritter von Greim from Munich to Berlin by plane while Soviet fighters were in the air, and appointed him commander of the Luftwaffe in a bunker, 30 meters underground, with the Red Army fighting street to street overhead. On April 23rd, Hitler appointed General Helmuth Weidling as commander of the Berlin defense area, then reversed course and ordered Weidling arrested for desertion, then reversed again and kept him. This was command from underground, arrest orders issued from 50 feet below the city to the man commanding its defense. If you value documented history told without flinching, subscribe now and support this work. Comment which city you are in. This research draws from the Führer bunker entry in the peer-reviewed German historical record at the Bundesarchiv, Germany's federal archives in Berlin, which holds original structural blueprints and personnel logs of the bunker complex, and from the Vorbunker article in Wikipedia, citing primary sources including Joachim Fest's Inside Hitler's Bunker, published by Farrar, Straus, and Giraud in 2004, based on direct post-war interviews with survivors of the complex. Now to the end. April 22, 1945. Hitler held his last Supreme Command conference in the Führer bunker. He declared that if Germany fell, he must die in Berlin. General Weidling told him on April 29th that the garrison would run out of ammunition by that evening. The Soviets were 500 meters from the bunker. Hitler did not answer for a long time. He finally gave Weidling permission to attempt a breakout. It was too late. Shortly after midnight, on April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in the map room of the bunker. A small civil ceremony, a modest breakfast afterward. He then dictated his last will and testament to his secretary, Traudl Junge, signed the documents at 4 a.m. and went to bed. The next day, April 30th, with the Red Army less than 500 meters away, Hitler and Braun committed suicide in the bunker. Their bodies were carried outside and cremated in the Chancellery Garden in a shell crater. Chief of the Army General Staff General Hans Krebs shot himself in the bunker. General Wilhelm Burgdorf shot himself. Magda Goebbels poisoned her 6 children in the upper Vorbunker and then died with her husband. The man who had commanded the most powerful military force on the continent had spent the critical years of the war in a series of increasingly fortified holes in the ground, and in those holes he had fired the generals who told him the truth, promoted the generals who told him what he wanted to hear, and refused every tactical retreat that might have preserved his army's ability to fight. Stalingrad. 800 days in the Masurian forest, the Führer bunker, 105 days underground until there was nothing left to command. In 1972, forensic odontologists Reidar Sogneus and Ferdinand Strom confirmed the dental remains found by the Soviets in the Chancellery Garden matched X-rays taken of Hitler in 1944. French forensic pathologist Philippe Charlier examined the same remains in 2017 and found them in what he called perfect agreement with the 1944 records. The man who built the concrete walls to protect himself was identified, decades later, by a jawbone dug from garden soil. The bunker did not save him, it just gave him a place to lose the war more slowly.